Welcome to the Free Cities podcast. My name is Timothy Allen, and this is the official podcast of the Free Cities Foundation. Hello and welcome to this episode number 84 of the Free Cities podcast. Well, today's episode is a Próspera update show. Próspera is, of course, one of the Free Cities ecosystem's flagship projects that, in my opinion, everyone should be watching very closely. What they're doing in Honduras and the pioneering issues that they are dealing with are certainly laying the groundwork for so many of the projects that we will see unfolding in the future. In Prague last week, I bumped into Próspera's CFO, Luke Thibodeau, and he gave me the lowdown on all the latest developments in the jurisdiction, including the exciting news that residents have now started moving into Duna, which is their flagship new build on the site, and also news on their legal battle with the Honduran government, and all the latest info on new projects and, interestingly, how Luke sees the project evolving now in the short to medium term. This discussion is jam-packed with great info and insights, and I hope it inspires you to go and check it out for yourself. As Luke puts it, and I love this quote, "It's all theoretical until it happens." And that is most certainly the case with Próspera. I've been watching it for a couple of years now. Anyway, comments and questions, as always, directed to me at podcast@free-cities.org, and check out the show notes for Free Cities info. And if you're interested in going a little deeper into Próspera, then check out episodes 2 to 9 of this podcast, way back when we first started. All but 2 of those episodes were recorded in Próspera by myself with various people involved in the project. And then, of course, whilst you're fantasizing about hot desking on a peaceful Roatanese beach, well, why don't you then just sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Luke Thibodeau.
First Father's Day.
Your first one? Yeah. Oh, congratulations. What have you got? What did you get? A boy or a girl?
A boy.
Yeah?
Yeah.
How old?
We unwrapped the boy.
Yeah.
He's 8 months now.
8 months?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so we got him and the wife, and they're both here with me at the hotel.
Really? First trip for the son, is it?
No, he's got a lot of miles on him.
Really?
Well, we've been flying back and forth to Roatan.
Yeah.
And then we had another trip to Cancun, and then we flew to Canada for a friend's wedding. He's been on probably 13 or 14 flights.
So maybe I should have... Well, why don't you introduce yourself first? That's nice and easy. Name and what you do, and then we'll move into the kind of the fact that you're going to and from Roatan, because that will be self-explanatory.
Yeah. No, sounds good. So my name's Luke. I'm the Chief Financial Officer of Próspera.
And you're living in Próspera?
And I'm living in Próspera. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
With your son and wife?
I'm living in Próspera with my son and wife. Yeah, that's right.
Wow.
So we've been there full time since April now. I've been with the project for about a year, just under a year. So we've been, flying back and forth doing that thing, but full time residents since April.
Wow.
Yeah.
How many of you are there that are full-time residents there?
There's a small group of us starting to form. Initially the community is made up of a lot of guys involved in the project. Those are sort of the first pioneers. There's a couple entrepreneurs who are setting up shops, setting up business, and they're also involved with the community. But I'd say true Prosperians, there's a few dozen. But there's a lot of people who live in Próspera, just don't know it, right? Like it's 420 acres, and it has existing villas, existing houses in that zone. So there's a lot of people, inside of Próspera who, they're not really Prosperians, so to speak. They're just sort of living within the zone without really realizing it, and their individual property is not yet enrolled. So you look at a map of the, enrolled land in the ZEDE, and there's little pockets of, privately owned land that's not yet incorporated. So I'd say, probably 150 to 200 people within the zone, and probably a few dozen of core Prosperians who understand the project and are there for that.
That's the first time I've ever heard them called Prosperians.
Oh,
it's a good word. It's got a ring to it, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Prosperians. It's almost like prospectors as well, which is kind of similar because it's a bit of a frontier place, isn't it?
That's funny.
Is that? I mean, this is. We often talk about this on this podcast about the kind of the fact that frontier people who come first, are often the craziest, the most transient, often, and the hardest to keep, if you know what I mean. A lot of digital nomads, for example, would find somewhere like Próspera a really interesting proposition. Have you noticed that, and have you thought about that? Like how do you keep people there and stop, or how do you stop people from just using it as a base? Right? Because obviously, presumably, you want people to come and stay and be part of the community for as long as possible, right?
It's a new project. So, defining that now is core to what we're doing. I work for the project, but I'm also the core demographic, right? I'm a young guy. I'm entrepreneurial. I have a family. I have a kid, so I'm building Próspera for me. So I'm building that into the fabric of what is the community there now, which is, awesome to be able to design that. But you're right, the kinds of people that Próspera is attracting and trying to attract are generally transient. They're guys who are, like you said, digital nomads. They're entrepreneurs. They want to build. They want to explore. They want to grow. But everybody's got to settle down, right? Like you have people, going from country to country, bouncing around, but it's exhausting. If you've traveled, a lot yourself, that you need to, there's this desire to settle down. And I think once people, look at what are the opportunities, once they decide to settle down, I think Próspera needs to be and should continue to, position itself to be that a very attractive option. So I think, we need to build the infrastructure, and I think we're doing that to attract the demographic that we want. We have the Montessori school, which is important to me. Thinking about raising kids there. We have, we're talking to private clinic providers to bring them into the zone. Like that's super important to me, having a young son. So we're building the infrastructure to make it very attractive, and we'll have done our job right if, in 2 years' time, someone like me has a harder time talking my wife into, not wanting to leave than wanting to come, right? Right now it's like, no, listen, I promise it's the next thing. Like I promise it'll shape out and there's going to be more of a community, and it's a little bit of that right now. And she sees it and she's awesome, right? There wasn't much, arm twisting there. But we'll have done our job right if in that period of time, people are having a harder time coming up with reasons why they shouldn't be in Próspera. And I think we're very close to that already. I think people see the system that they're in, and they're looking for an alternative. And I think that's probably why there's a lot of people who are digital nomads. They're looking for something else. And I think Próspera provides that.
What's your own personal history then with the project and just this kind of world in general? Because I know this from personal experience. It's a bit of a niche world, the world of places like Próspera, jurisdictions, people traveling around the world looking for the better life. It's not mainstream by any means yet. So how do you get involved in this, and how do you ever even hear about a job at a place like Próspera? Because that's weird enough in itself, isn't it?
Yeah, I first heard about it. I'm a Bitcoiner. So that was, my first introduction was in my community, in my circle. I was at Adopting Bitcoin, which is a conference in El Salvador. And it was just, happenstance. I happened to walk into a workshop that was, already in progress. I hadn't been planning to go. And my buddies were there like, hey, Luke, come check this out. I'm like, oh, okay, sounds good. I just finished up lunch. Walk in, I start hearing about Próspera, and it's like, my mind is blown. I'm just, you don't realize how bad something is until you find, a better alternative. And I think that's why a lot of people are so drawn to Bitcoin. They don't realize how bad their money is until they find Bitcoin. And for me, what I say is I didn't realize how bad, governance was. I had an idea. I grew up in a conservative home. I was a libertarian, but I didn't realize how bad that system was until I started hearing about there's a different way to do this. That's why, okay, like it started to click there. So that's when I first heard about the project. And get this, so I hear about it in November at Adopting Bitcoin. And not even 3 months later, my wife's family has this vacation planned to nowhere else except for Roatan.
Wow.
And she's been, the months prior, she's been trying to be like, hey, you know, like come with me and my family on this vacation. I'm like, yeah, as fun as that sounds, like, you know, go have fun with your family. I'll, you know, hang out for a week back home. And then as soon as I get back, I'm like, hey, like, you know, is there still room? Like, can I still come? Or are we still on for Roatan? She's like, wait, what? So that's kind of how it all came about. And then not even, like I said, not even 3 months after hearing about the project, I'm on site with Dushan. He's, you know, heading up the Bitcoin Education Center, that like massive Bitcoin Education Center, you know, at the top of the hill in Próspera, beautiful Bitcoin Education Center. But I'm with him and I'm seeing this project and I'm meeting the people who are involved, and it all sort of came together there. So I knew at that point I wanted to be involved. I didn't know how yet. I had toured around, you know, Duna, the beta district, and seen the Duna Tower going up. And I was thinking, you know, maybe as an investment opportunity, like obviously this thing is, in my opinion, this thing was going to take off. Like maybe I just want to buy a unit there. So I ended up getting on, you know, the mailing list for like an investor mailing list. And then, yeah, they had started their search for a new CFO. And, you know, it was an opportunity I couldn't pass up. So got in touch with Eric, and then the rest is history.
And what's have you been in the CFO business in the past then? Is that like where you come from? Or
Yeah. And I think that's part of what drew me. I was a CFO of a publicly traded non-custodial Bitcoin brokerage in Canada. So we did, you know, online stuff, ATM stuff. So and I was also the chief compliance officer there. So, you know, I'm steeped in this culture of over-regulation and expensive regulation and audits and, you know, reviews and compliance people, you know, peeling back, you know, what are you doing? And just this intense, expensive oversight. So for me, hearing about, you know, the regulatory regime within Próspera was mind-blowing. It's like, it's so innovative, so creative. And for me as a businessman, like, you know, I'm entrepreneurial. Thinking about the types of businesses and the types of entrepreneurs that this unlocks, like you want to do a crypto exchange in Canada or in the United States, like you're spending millions and millions of dollars, no exaggeration, you're spending millions of dollars. You're hiring teams of lawyers, teams of compliance specialists, you know, to deal with the regulatory bodies, and it's so cost prohibitive. So there isn't a good free market in that space. And you can take that same business model and apply it to Próspera, and you can say, listen, I want to set up a crypto exchange. It's a regulated industry. I understand that. I want to use the laws from, you know, Switzerland, and maybe those don't work in a year from now. I'll opt into, you know, Germany, and those don't work for now. I mean, maybe I'll opt into wherever else. You can choose your regulatory, you know, body that oversees you. Like that was super innovative for me coming from that background, right?
In that case of choosing regulations, in that specific case you're talking about there, are you choosing, say, the regulations from Austria because it's just a lot cheaper and a lot easier? Is that the main reason? You know, and say you're saying you need to employ millions of dollars worth of lawyers. Is that the main impetus in that particular example? I don't mean across the board. I'm trying to work out why else you might do it. You know. Yeah,
that's a great question. A lot of people think that's the main reason. I think that's the driver for a lot of new initiatives. If I'm, you know, setting up a company from, you know, just from scratch, from seed capital, and I hadn't done it before, this makes it a heck of a lot easier to do it for the first time. But there are industries, and there's lots of industries that want to shift operations geographically, and that would require them to learn an entire new systems of regulations for that new host country, right? If I'm a cryptocurrency exchange in Canada and I want to go to Brazil, I gotta hire Brazilian lawyers. I gotta teach my operations team about, you know, Brazilian KYC. I've got to do all these different things that allow me to do the business that I know, and I do it well in a new country. So when you have something like regulatory election, instead of doing that, I can say, listen, I'm set up for operations in Canada. I understand in Canada. My lawyers and my regulators and my compliance guys all understand in Canada. I can shift that business model with no friction into Próspera, into Honduras, and access an entirely new geography with no headache, with no, relearning, no uncertainty, those sorts of things. So the cost and the setup, is one thing, but for me, it's the application of a complicated regulated business in multiple jurisdictions. Like, it's going to change the way that people, do business. Imagine that you get banking set up in Próspera, you get your business set up in Próspera. Próspera opens a new hub in El Salvador. Overnight, you just gained access to an entire new country. Próspera opens a new hub in Africa. You overnight gained access to an entire new, continent. Like, it's mind blowing when you think about the implications. And I think regulatory election has a lot of, implications beyond just the cost for those things.
Something I've never quite fully understood as well is when you choose a regulatory model. I think it's from OECD. Yep. Say I'm use that example again. I'm a cryptocurrency exchange, and I choose the regulations from the UK. I probably wouldn't actually thinking about it, but let's say I did. Who oversees whether or not I'm actually adhering to those? Is it the government of Próspera, or is it the UK? I don't understand it.
Yeah, you're getting into some good stuff, and I'm the numbers guy, so I'll give you my understanding, and I understand it, fairly well. But in that case, any true free market needs to have some level of assurance over the operations that happen within the business, right? So typically, we would expect a government body to be overseeing those operations and be the regulator in that case. In a free market economy, the theory holds, and it's what we apply in Próspera, that function of regulatory oversight can be best and should be best managed by an insurance provider. An insurance provider is the only industry in the world who has the financial alignment and financial incentive to find the most profitable way to regulate business. If they over-regulate, they're spending a tremendous amount of money on lawyers, on audits, on all this regulatory, burden that costs a ton of money. It's not efficient. And if they under-regulate, well, then they have, so many claims and their business model doesn't make sense. So if you look at it on a curve at it starts high and then it goes into a U shape and then it ends high, they have the financial motive to find, the least costly way to regulate a business. So in your example, you choose your OECD country that you want to be regulated by. You're going to go through a process as a regulated industry to be insured. You have to have, regulatory insurance in Próspera. The insurer is going to have a conversation with you on, what am I going to do to make sure that my business is functioning in a way that's ethical, that's not high risk, so that the insurance provider isn't on the hook for some massive payout. So the insurance provider is going to restrict you in ways. Maybe you're in a completely unfamiliar territory for the insurance provider. So what they might do is they'll say, okay, we'll underwrite your policy. You can operate in Próspera, but you're going to be required to, have a monthly check-in with this industry-leading, expert that we've identified. And this industry-leading expert is going to give you, a formal attestation. They're going to attest to the fact that we understand, Luke's crypto exchange. He knows what he's doing. We checked these things, and we're giving our monthly approval. Right. And maybe then they say, and we want you to get an audit from, one of these on this list of audit firms. We want you to get an audit, annually from these individuals. So they can, kind of pick and choose how they want to enforce that on you. And it's your choice. It's like, well, do you want to, operate in this regulated industry? Well, you need insurance, and the insurance provider is requiring you to do this. You can accept it or not. Right. So it's kind of up to you whether or not you accept it. And that creates a market now for insurance providers. If I see, you're trying to open, Tim's, crypto exchange, and your insurance premium's, $400,000, and you're happily paying it, I'm like, well, I know him. Like, he's not doing anything shitty. Like, I'll do it for $200K. You know what I mean? So it starts to create a market for that insurance product. And that's what I think is next for Próspera. Once we start to see more and more, these regulated industries come online, we're going to see, new innovative ways for insurance companies to start to understand risk and underwrite risk. And there's an interesting connection with, what we're seeing now in Bitcoin Prague with all this stuff with Nostr and Bitcoin. I think it allows an insurance provider to really potentially leverage those technologies and underwrite risk on a case-by-case basis with this publicly verifiable social identity. It's like this social network is basically telling the insurance provider, listen, I know this guy, I know this guy, I know this guy. And it's giving you a little bit more comfort on the activities that you're doing. So it's kind of all interconnected in this kind of cool way. But yeah,
is that really the way that it's going? So let me just say it back to you so I understand it. So Nostr is now getting into the realm of identities. So I have a Nostr account and it belongs to me and it's mine, but I can use it to access a social media network if I want. But like one of the, whatever it is, Primal that I use. But also you're saying now that I can use that as a kind of rating to get myself, say, preferential insurance, or in the future. Is that kind of what you're saying now?
In the future, that's how I see it. That's how I see it going. That's the way I see it building towards. The conversations I'm having with guys who are heavily involved in Nostr more than myself, they see that as a use case. It's just this, this social proof of identity that I think can lend very well into the insurance space. So, I mean, are we in Próspera doing this now? Definitely not. We're underwriting, insurance policies for regulated industries the old-fashioned way. It's like, well, let's understand your business, let's define the risk, and let's underwrite the policy. But when you see this web of decentralized entities kind of converging together, it's this interesting sort of dynamic that you're starting to see, and that's the future that I think could be. The bit before when we were talking about insurance companies underwriting regulations from other countries, basically, making sure you adhere to them. What happens in the case of companies creating their own regulations, which can also happen? Is it the same process? They just have to be a little bit more risk averse because it's a new arena, basically. Yeah, great question. Companies have done it. There's a couple of banking charters that have been passed. Banks want to set up in Próspera. It's like, well, maybe we're not rehypothecating funds, so we have one-to-one treasury reserves. So we don't need all the restrictions on, what kind of instruments are we investing in? How are we earning yield? How are we using customer funds? None of that makes sense. So they've been able to sort of define, that within the regulatory mechanism that they create. And it's similar. So you create the regulatory mechanism, and then you'd have restrictions applied to that. So Próspera, the insurance provider would say, okay, we approve it, but we're underwriting the risk, and X, Y, and Z need to be true. So you still have the same stipulations.
It's just it's a bigger process, a longer process to discover what the premium might be, or something.
Exactly. But it's honestly not. You hear about this idea, and if you're rooted in this, fiat system, this bureaucracy, me in Canada, like if I heard about this and I didn't know anything about Próspera, I'd say, well, that's going to take forever, right? Like I'm used to dealing with bureaucrats. I'm used to dealing with the slow-moving system, the system that is not innovative, that doesn't want disruption, and that's not the case in Próspera. You're not, making, an intellectual argument to a bureaucrat. You're making a business case argument to a businessman. You're talking to a private, insurance company and saying, listen, here's me, here's you, here's what I'm doing. You understand it. Here's the risk. Here's the value at risk. Underwrite the policy. So it's a fairly quick process to get that in place.
Going back to what you said about the pioneers currently living there, let's say, the first wave of people that are actually living in Próspera, yourself being one of them. Can you talk a little bit about who those people are, or what businesses they are? What's currently going on the ground now in Próspera?
Yeah, right now, it's a number of, I'd say the initial community, like I said earlier, is Próspera pioneers. It's people involved in the project. Me on the finance side, another individual and his family on the hotel operations side. A couple families there. Another family is involved on the real estate development side. So they're all under the Próspera umbrella in different ways, and that's the initial community that's forming. The dive shop guy and the golf course manager. This is the initial community that's starting to form, and these are the guys that like if I'm having I'd ship down a smoker. I ship down like a pellet smoker to do briskets and stuff like that. Like if I'm doing a nice barbecue on Saturday night, like this is the community of people that I'm inviting over. And a lot of it is, core to the initial Próspera build out. There are a couple of businesses and entrepreneurs that are also within that community. But we haven't seen any headliner shifts in that. There's still, the guys at Circular Factory, they're still doing their thing. There's the guys at, Nicholas and his fund, he's still doing his thing. So there are people who aren't involved directly with the project who are are part of that core community as well. But I'd say, like, you know, at least for myself, my initial core community is those individuals involved in the project directly.
What about, I thought Duna Residence was completed. Are there people living in it already or moving in? I think it was the other day, wasn't it? It was very recently.
Yeah, this week.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, this week they're handing over keys, and I'm not even there for it. I'm pretty bummed about that. But yeah, so, and that's sort of, I guess you could call that phase 2 of community building, is those are Prosperians. Those are people who understand the mission. They bought a unit in this free private zone. They knew what they were getting into. They have, you know, their Próspera residency. They're in it. So that's the community that's starting to form, you know, around Duna. And I haven't experienced that on the ground yet, because I'm, you know, here in Prague right now while they're handing over keys. But yeah, that'll be another, you know, 82 units, probably over 100 people within that.
Really? Do you know much about the demographic or how many units are? I've got a feeling we talked about this the other day, and you said they sold half and they kept half back to be rental units. Was that right? Yeah,
it was about that split. So we did pre-sales, and then during the pre-sale stage, we had this event early this year called Vitalia. Vitalia was this pop-up city. It was this online community of, you know, biohackers, people who want to live forever, that whole thing. This online community, you know, decided to come together and do this pop-up city and be, you know, in community together. And we saw I think almost 400 people converge on Próspera for that. And obviously, like, a tremendous, you know, success in terms of the economic benefit to our zone, to the restaurants, to the dive shop, to the golf course, to all these amenities. You know, we saw that as a huge value add. So we saw this first sort of app being developed on Próspera, right? If Próspera is Bitcoin, it's, you know, layer 1. We saw the first Lightning Network take off, like the first layer 2 within that community. So we saw success early this year with that. And, you know, we had pre-sold what we did, and we had, you know, legal contracts to deliver those units and sell those units, and that's fine. But we said, well, you know, rather than having this building completed, and then obviously the rest of the units are going to sell very quickly because people are living there and it's no longer, you know, a risky initiative, you know, why not hold back some of that? And the next time Vitalia, or the next time, you know, Bitcoin, whatever, Caribbean or whatever conference is held in Próspera, the next time we have this event bringing together people who understand Próspera, we can do it so much better. We have, you know, more capacity, more amenities, more resources, and then we can start, you know, maybe we start pre-sales on, you know, Tower 2, Tower 3. So it was a business decision to sort of strategically pivot and hold back those units, and then now we're going to leverage those as part of this sort of community building aspect.
It would also be very beneficial if you're renting to people that want to live forever as well.
It's a long lease.
So tell me a little bit about what's literally about to happen in this handing over of the keys. Are you talking about literally just people turning up and going, great, I'm moving into my apartment? Literally, man. Is there furniture and stuff in there?
It's furnished, baby. They're ready to go. And it's so exciting being a part of the project and seeing this, because it's all theoretical until it happens. Like building property in Próspera, it was theoretical until we said, you know, let's do the thing. Let's build Beta Building. We built Beta Building. It's like, all right, like, that worked. All right, let's do it again. Let's do, you know, Duna Tower. And it's theoretical until you stand in front of this massive 14-story condo building in a free private city in a special economic zone in Honduras. And it's like, you know, holy cow, like, this is happening. This is real. Like, this is going on. And then again, with the turnover of keys, it's like, property ownership. Property ownership is different in Próspera than it is in Roatan. In Roatan, you need to have residence. You need to have, you know, this and that and the other thing. Próspera, you just have, you know, Próspera residence. So let's do this. Let's test this thing. And now we literally have people who own property, you know, a fee simple title, full ownership of property in Roatan because of Próspera, only because of Próspera. So we're seeing these keys being handed over, and these people are excited because, you know, they get to live in community with their friends. They understand Próspera and the mission, and they're like, you know, I keep using this word, but they're like, you know, these sort of first pioneers into this project. So yeah, it's happening. These guys are there. They're excited. If you look online, you know, there's videos of people, you know, taking keys and doing, you know, promo stuff. Like,
are there?
Yeah.
Oh, I should have looked at those.
Yeah.
Because I went there. It was a number of months. In fact, I think when you were at BTC, adopting BTC. I think I was at that talk as well. It was down in a kind of basement-y type place, wasn't it?
Yeah.
In Próspera. Yeah. That was I think the last time I went to Próspera. So the Duna Building was somewhat of a shell. But I've seen videos of it since. And what about what's happened to the? Did it turn out that you had a load of work units in there as well? Was it a mixed-use tower? Like at the time they were talking about that.
Yeah, at the time they were talking about, what's going to make the most sense. Sort of put it out to the community and built on that. So there's 4 stories. The first 4 floors are mixed use, so retail and commercial. So think like restaurants, cafe, as well as, maybe an office space, a co-working space, things like that. So those floors are dedicated to that. And with the community moving in now, we'll start to see who takes what, who does what, who builds what. But it's chicken and the egg, right? Like you can't go to a bunch of businesses and say, hey, like, set up your restaurant here. I promise this building will be full next month. You can't really do that. So I think you need sort of the critical mass and an entrepreneur, responsibly needs to see the population there. And then they're like, okay, well, now I see the opportunity. So we haven't seen those spaces, activated just yet. But I think that'll be next with the residential stuff coming online.
So if you are a resident now, do you have to pop into the nearby town to buy food or whatever? And that, how would you be a resident there?
Yeah, so there's a number of amenities inside Duna, but I think if you wanted to really activate within the zone, you're gonna require we have a water taxi to sort of the Pristine Bay Resort. So there's a number of restaurants and bars, and that's where the golf club and stuff like that is. So you'd have access to that, obviously. But yeah, you're right. If you wanted to do your grocery shopping, things like that, you're taking the 10-minute hike in, and you're doing that sort of in Greater Roatan. There isn't grocery stores, there isn't convenience stores set up just yet.
And how are you going to let that unfold? Are you waiting for the free market to build for example, a supermarket, say, or something, or are you going to take the initiative as Próspera and do something like that?
Yeah, I don't know, man. I think supermarkets days are dated, right? Like,
you're talking about flying stuff in drones and that?
Not necessarily that, because that sounds wacky, but like me and my family, right? Don't judge me. But we'll order groceries and it'll just be delivered to our house. So we don't leave the zone. A little guy on a motorcycle comes with a bag of groceries. He just delivers it to us every week. And I think that's the kind of the way that things are going. People are getting used to this delivery economy. People are getting used to that, and they're familiar with that. And guys moving into Próspera are probably familiar with that. So they're probably going to be doing a lot of the same. And I think these delivery companies are going to sort of, get wise to that and maybe have it a faster service, or maybe like a regular service, or just, whatever they do to innovate. I think they'll leverage that. And that's a form of the free market sort of, filling this need. But I mean, who knows? Maybe somebody spins up a supermarket and it's a hit. But I think it feels pretty, old-fashioned to me, being someone who regularly just, I pull out my phone, I select what I want, and it's here in 10 minutes. Like, that's kind of what I'm used to now. So, and then the drone stuff on top of that, it's like, well, that'll be...
It's quite a Central American thing, in my experience, that delivery thing as well. We lived in El Salvador for a while. And every morning, a truck appeared with fruit and veg on the back of the truck playing a tune, and everyone just popped out of their shop, out of their house, and bought. And it was good value. The market was strong. Everyone bought from this thing, because it literally meant you didn't have to go anywhere, which in a lot of places in Central America, that's a bit of a pain in the arse. Actually leaving, you might not even have a vehicle. You might, it's not possible to do those kind of things.
You see that in Roatan as well, right? You see the fruit truck guys driving around. You see the fruit stands and stuff, and I think people are, generally speaking, entrepreneurial, and they'll fill that need. The fruit trucks in the grocery trucks and whatever else. They'll discover Duna. They'll discover these 100 people living out in Duna, and they'll fix.
How would that work? Out of interest, say I'm a Roatanese. Is that how you say it? Is that what? I don't know. No.
I don't know.
Say I'm a Roatanese entrepreneur living outside of Próspera, yeah, and I've got a food truck. Can I just drive in and sell stuff, or do I need to get some kind of permission? Or
Yeah. So right now, if you're doing business in Próspera, you would need to have a form of residency. We're workshopping what makes the most sense to answer this exact question. Do we sell temporary passes? Do we allow, certain businesses? But I think there has to be a strong element of access control for obvious reasons, within the jurisdiction. So speaking right now, you would have, if you're inside the zone conducting business, you would have to be a resident and you'd have access control, and they would check your residency on the way in. It would be kind of, a bit of friction. Realistically, I think what happens is either we come up with a better product on the Próspera side to, allow these entrepreneurs and these, delivery trucks to come in and service, Prosperians, or it's simply, drop it off at the security gate and then we'll have somebody, bring it up to your room kind of thing, just to keep the separation there. But yeah, there's certainly an element of access control that needs to be and is maintained.
I wonder how that would work with drones as well. That's a very interesting prospect, because you've got the ability for drones to land on the top of the tower, haven't you? Wasn't that a part of the design of it?
Yeah, there's a drone pad up there. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. It's quite it's bizarre, really. So, when do you think that might happen? Then has anyone been hinting at anything like that? Drone deliveries and
yeah, there's a company that started up in Próspera called Aerial Loop, and they're solving this exact need. Timeline is unknown. I wouldn't give a timeline even if I heard one, because who knows what that actually looks like. But with the drone pad upstairs, theoretically I order whatever from mainland Honduras, and it's a 30-minute delivery time.
They're talking about coming. What? I don't know. It's a long way, isn't it?
Yeah, that's not that long. It's about
right over the sea from the mainland.
Yeah.
How far is it to?
Not long. Like, it would be on the ferry. It would take you an hour and a half to get there. So and that's a slow ferry. Think a drone is just ripping, right? So
that drone technology must have moved on a lot since the last time I flew one.
I mean, I'm not a drone guy either, so I'm.
Well, you used to get 15 minutes max in the sky. That's.
Well, they're piloting it elsewhere in the world, right? They're piloting. Amazon's piloting drone delivery and stuff like that. So I think the tech is there.
I saw a video online yesterday from China of. I think something was happening on a road somewhere, and drones were just ferrying building materials backwards and forwards across this valley. I mean, big, heavy things, not like little drones. These were like, yeah, gosh.
That's bananas.
It is. It's already moving a little bit too fast for me. I think I'm getting too old for this. You look like you're absolutely pumped by it all.
Yeah.
You are, right?
Oh, absolutely, man. I'm excited to see what comes out of it. And it's like I said, guys are going to have ideas that nowhere else in the world they can activate. And it's so incredible to be a part of that and to understand that and to see and understand, what that could look like. If it's drone delivery, I think that's, that could be game changing. To me, it sounds, a little bit trivial. It's like, I don't mind, waiting for delivery of something, drone delivery. I don't know what that changes, but, I'm not thinking like some of these entrepreneurs are thinking. But we're already seeing it take place. There's another company that started in Próspera they're called Mini Circle. They do like gene therapy stuff. It's something you cannot do in the United States, and people are coming, from around the world. These people are coming into the Próspera jurisdiction to receive these therapies that can't be done anywhere else. So you're going to see stuff like that, and the drone is one example, and the gene therapy is the other. You're going to start to see stuff like that, and I'm pumped by it.
That when I hear things like that, I know that there's going to be a percentage of the population that go, wait a minute, you can't do that. You can't just experiment with gene therapy in a place with no rules and blah, blah. I take it that's a common retort to that kind of stuff, is it?
It's controversial. Yeah, it's controversial for sure. And at the end of the day, we have a regulatory system that we feel is built in a way that has the safeguards in place. It's not the Wild West. It's not anything goes. It's not lawless. There's not, people running around doing whatever they want. We have restrictions. For example, you can't we're restricting, for example, vice industries. You can't come and set up a strip club or a casino or things like that, because we don't want to be associated as a jurisdiction that it was created for this stuff, for avoiding and sidestepping laws and avoiding and sidestepping, things that are in place and rules that are in place for a reason. So there's certainly freedom and flexibility, but there's also, safeguards in place to make sure that, things are being done responsibly and experts are involved where they need to be and things like that. But there's always going to be stuff that's controversial, definitely.
Do you imagine, I know one of Prospera's ideas is to, and this is probably the wrong word, but franchise, if you know what I mean. It's kind of, I don't know how you describe it, but create more Prosperas, right? Do you anticipate that they'll all have different personalities? Is that the idea of that kind of thing?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
You can't take a one size fits all approach. We've seen that around the world, trying to import, America's version of democracy somewhere else. Like, it sounds good, but it oftentimes fails. It doesn't work. So I think these, I call them nodes. You call them franchises.
It's a
bad
word.
They're connected, and they're all sort of a part of the Próspera governance framework. They definitely will have identities, and they're going to have problems that they solve that are unique to that zone. We're working closely with Megat Wade now, who's doing work in Africa. So Próspera, when it sets up its node in Africa, it's going to be a completely different dynamic, a completely different set of problems that it's solving for in Africa. But it's using the same, mechanisms of here. We believe that the root problem of a lot of these issues that are stunting economic growth, that are keeping people, in poverty, is bad governance, and it's still solving for that common thread of bad governance. So it's solving it. I think it's going to be solving it in unique and different ways. Leveraging different things from different geographical regions. Próspera in Africa is going to look wildly different than Próspera in Roatan, which is going to look wildly different than Próspera in El Salvador. But there's going to be this sort of common thread of the governance system should, in my mind's eye at least, look very similar across the board.
Can you talk about specifics on the Africa thing, like where, who, what?
Yeah, it's early. It's super early stages, so there aren't many specifics to discuss. It's something that's being explored now, and we're working again with this freedom-minded advocate who sees what Próspera is doing, is a huge supporter of what we're doing, and thinks that this could be a great solution to a lot of areas in Africa. But there's nothing, there's no shovels in the ground yet.
Or countries, just out of interest. I'm just interested.
Nothing. Like there's no agreements in place with any specific countries that I know of.
Say it appears in a country. How would it work? I'm presuming that if you have a Próspera residency, that would include all Prósperas. Is that the way it would work in a network like that?
Yeah, that would be the idea.
So what do you do about the nation at that point? You still have to kind of get visas between nations, etc., or whatever.
Yeah. People often misinterpret what Próspera is in that exact way, right? Próspera is not a city-state. Próspera is not a country. It's not a Vatican City. Próspera it's a charter city. It's driven by a charter that was created in a special economic zone, but it's still in Honduras, right? It's a municipality in Honduras. To be in Próspera is to be in Honduras. I, as a Canadian, need to have the ability to be in Honduras, to travel to and live within Próspera, right? For me, that means I can stay there for 3 months at a time. And it's a rolling 3 months. So I can stay for 3 months, leave for 2 days, stay for 3 months, leave for 2 days. So I could be there, 360 days in a year, right? And it would be the same likely in other countries. If we had that extra level of sovereignty, maybe it's not. Maybe we have an airstrip into Próspera and you don't even have, immigration issues with the host country. That could be the case. I think it's highly unlikely, though. I think, from my opinion, and again, I'm the numbers guy, these host nations want this degree of autonomy, this degree of sovereignty that they're not going to give up, for the special economic zone. They want to be bystanders, and they want to, see what happens sort of in the sandbox, but they still want to control that sandbox. They still want that sandbox in their yard, so to speak.
When I think about the future, though, I do think that one day, and actually Próspera in Roatan is a good example because you're on the sea. I've always thought that a network of cities like Próspera would be good to link up with, like boats, livable boats, because you could then just, but not be completely self-sovereign, so that you could just get off Próspera and then go to bed in a cabin and wake up in a new Próspera, which is somewhere else, like El Salvador in that case. But that would be a lovely future. I think a lot of people would very much appreciate that.
I disagree.
Really?
I think, for an economy to grow, you need to have citizens. You need to have people that are there contributing and building and integrated in and proud of their community. You need to have this I think there's this lost sense of community in Canada. Certainly, I don't know if it was ever there. In Latin America, you see it where, people are out in the street. They know each other. They're communicating with each other. They're like everybody knows everybody. In Europe, a lot of the places that I've been, I see a similar dynamic. You have the old town square. Every country or city, big city you visit has an old town square, and people congregate and gather around it, and they're familiar with each other. And there's businesses who have been there for however many generations. And I think that's so important to the fabric of a lot of societies. And I think if you're transient like that, you're not going to be able to build that, and you're not going to be able to truly build, a robust economy if every 3 or 4 years there's this changeover, because it's this time preference, right? Like if you have high time preference and it's like, well, I'm not going to invest, I'm not going to build because, well, I can, go off to wherever on a boat next month. It's like, well, you're not going to make the effort to build community. Community building takes effort. I know that personally, right? My wife and I, when we moved down to Roatan, we didn't know anybody. And we said from day one, we need to integrate with this community. We're moving there. We're meeting people. We found a church within the first week, and we're like, we just need to plug in somewhere. Like somebody, we need this community around us because it can get so lonely. And I think if you're transient like that and you're temporal in your thinking like that, I think you lose a lot of that community building.
Do you think that the 21st century is an era of travel, and it's almost like once you've done it and once you've seen a bit of the world, it's very hard to sort of go back to living that life where you stay in the same place for a long time, which is kind of what you're talking about there. You're hoping that Próspera will be a place where people stay and even don't necessarily need to go and shopping or whatever, but it all happens there. Do you think that will work? Do you think that we've seen too much of the world this is my own experience. I've traveled loads, and where I live now, it would be very difficult to just spend all my time there. Like I have a sigh of relief to be in Prague for a week. It's totally different. It's totally new. There's people everywhere because I live out in the countryside, back home. So do you think that model's going to work? Or is that, that may not even be the model. That just may be your own preference. But that model of trying to keep people in or just hoping that people will stay in a relatively small jurisdiction,
Yeah, like I don't see those ideas as mutually exclusive. Where I'm describing that I see community here, for example, people still travel. Right, I still travel. I'm here right now, so I still travel. But I have a home base, right? When I say to my wife, "Oh, I'm excited to go home," like that means something. I have a home base, and you have a home base too. And I think that's important. Having a home base, having somewhere that you can, set your roots. I think that's important. I don't think that means you're not traveling. That would be ridiculous. I think what's more important, maybe where I'll reframe, the conversation is, in my opinion, Próspera is so powerful, and what you're describing is so powerful because you can shift, you can change. You're able to, opt out of the current system and opt into a new system. So if Próspera and Roatan is maybe the charter changed, maybe they passed some sort of wacky thing, maybe COVID came back and for whatever reason, the majority of people in Próspera said, yeah, max and vax, like that's what we want to do everywhere you go. It's like, okay, well, I have the option to now opt out into a new zone. That's important. Having the freedom to do that is important. And it forces Próspera to not treat you as a citizen like a country does, but really treat you as a customer. It's like, how do we maintain that this governance system in a way that's profitable for our investors? And that's only done if we're, really thinking about the individual as a customer. And hopefully that results in you not wanting to leave. But I think if you are able to leave, that's the important part, the optability.
What can you talk a little bit about what's coming soon in Próspera? Duna was a project that was kind of at the forefront, and now it's complete, right? Pretty much, apart from what are the next big plans? Or once again, are you letting the market decide?
We're strategic where we're investing our capital. We're investing our capital in initiatives that we think will catalyze new industry verticals. So things that will lend to build the framework and the groundwork for new businesses and for the free market to build new industries. For example, an industry hub on mainland, ZEDE. What does that look like? Is that where we're going to invest our capital so that people who aren't interested maybe in community building and living in this Próspera community, but maybe they can leverage that and build some sort of nearshoring port, or maybe it's building out for a clinic in one of our spaces inside of Próspera. Can we invest capital and build the foundation for that new industry vertical? A medical center, things like that. Maybe it's acquiring land to catalyze a brand new, type of factory. So there's lots of things that are on the radar, and all of those things, they're not simply, let's build 5 more homes, let's build another pool, let's keep doing what we're doing. Our investment now is laser focused on how do we, again, catalyze these new industry verticals? How do we get the next generation of entrepreneurs who are coming to Próspera excited and making it as diverse an investment base as possible? So that's the big thing, the big picture. Smaller picture, we have, different entities coming online. One called Nomad Village. They do like these little cluster villages around the world. They chose Próspera as one of their next sites. So they're going to be hopefully very soon activating, one of their villages next to Duna Tower.
What does that mean?
Super
activating
exciting.
A village? What? Building?
Shovels in the ground. Yeah, building like a cluster of houses, basically, like a little village.
Are they like a kind of WeWork for digital nomads type of thing?
I think so.
Right.
I think so.
I'm guessing just by the sound of it.
Yeah.
Right. So new buildings then.
Some new buildings. We're within Próspera, we're doubling capacity at our hotel. We finished Duna now. It's still a construction zone. There's still dirt. We still have to landscape. There's still work to be done. But Duna, I'd say, is 99% done. Within the hotel, we're doubling capacity to, again, support these events, and we're investing into the infrastructure for supporting events. So we're doing things like that just to, enhance what we have. And that will allow us to really, fully take advantage of the asset base we have today, which is very important, right? We have these cash flowing assets. We want to make sure we're making good fiduciary duties to extract as much value out of that as possible. But we're also, reinvesting those funds into new projects that on a bigger scale can activate some pretty cool projects.
Do you get a sense of the direction it's all going in? You mentioned like events. Do you get a sense being there all the time that, oh yeah, this is going to be big here, or like events, it might easily become a place where people say, hey, yeah, we can put our event on here really easily and with very minimum trouble and XYZ or whatever? Or is that just going to be one aspect of it? As someone who's living there and working there, you must be getting a sense of the general direction it's going in.
Yeah, I think it's in the phase right now where events will be the catalyst to community building. Events, we're at Bitcoin Prague right now, right? Like, this is a community that's gathered around Bitcoin as a sound money, freedom principles, decentralized. All these different things lend to this gathering of individuals around this, community. And I think those communities are going to start to find Próspera and realize that they can sort of, congregate and be together and really, flesh out their ideas in community together. So I think in the near term, that's where I see Próspera going. It's going to be heavy in events, Bitcoin events. We're going to be hosting some Bitcoin events, doing Bitcoin stuff. I think that's where in the near to medium term, that's where a lot of our effort will be focused, is just getting people to come down and see the place, understand what it is, have an event there and start to, look around and think about what they could be doing within Próspera. Ultimately, we exist to sort of, build a community of entrepreneurs, right? So what we need to do, our job is to get the entrepreneurs to come and see us, to come and understand what Próspera is. And we'll have done our job right if those entrepreneurs are there and excited and have the tools to do, the building, have the tools to be entrepreneurs. So in the short term, I think that's the direction I see it going, is a heavy emphasis on events, a heavy emphasis on getting people to come and visit and stay, temporarily. And I think out of that, we'll start to see the longer term community builds. But man, you're not going to set up a stall somewhere and be like, hey, come move to Próspera, like just buy a place, sight unseen. So I think it's sort of the natural evolution. And yeah, seeing the events take place to date on the ground has been pretty cool to see, for sure.
Is it still possible to buy somewhere in Próspera now?
Yeah, there's lots of private property for sale.
What about in Duna's? Not possible in Duna now.
I think potentially if somebody had a unit that they wanted to sell. But yeah, again, the remaining units that were unsold, we made the decision, earlier this year to put those into a rental pool. So I believe most of those are offline. But if there was one or two sales that were sort of in limbo, then potentially, but I think it's sort of few and far between. But within Pristine Bay, there's lots of lots, there's lots of villas, there's lots of investment opportunities that way. That wouldn't be a Próspera sale. That would be Luke owns a villa and he's selling it to you privately and it just happens to be in Próspera, then you incorporate the land and then now you're a part of Próspera. But there's a number of those for sale within Pristine Bay.
Wait a minute, I didn't quite understand that. When you say incorporate the land, what's the connection between Próspera and the physical boundary of Próspera in a way? Like that's
it's not super easy to understand if you haven't been involved in the project like I have. So I kind of gloss over these things. So to try and describe it, Próspera ZEDE is a zone which includes land that has been incorporated into the ZEDE. Okay, Próspera, the company that I'm the CFO for, we're the organizer and promoter. We basically provide the governance services to the land that's incorporated in the ZEDE. Próspera also owns some of the land, most of the land, I'd say like 99.9% of the land within the ZEDE. But because some of the land that we incorporated sort of was, a larger geographical area that had those private villa owners inside of it, those specific houses, if I own that house, I would need to opt in and I would need to register my land into the ZEDE. Right? And it's an optional model. You can opt in, you can opt out at any point.
And can you incorporate into the ZEDE if you're further out a little bit? Is that possible under the law? Or?
Yeah, you can, and we've had that, right? So it can be sort of an archipelago of Próspera ZEDE incorporated land, and we have some zones that aren't attached to the main, Próspera city, you can call it, that have been incorporated. So another area where we were doing employee outsourcing, it's about 15 minutes from the main city. That's Próspera incorporated land. Again, mainland Setu, that's Próspera incorporated land, but it's not all connected. So yeah, you can opt to acquire land and then enroll it into the land bank and be a part of the Próspera ZEDE. It would need to go through the approval of the council, which if you just bought a house in the middle of nowhere, you're like, yeah, I want to be a part of Próspera. It's like, well, it's not worth it for us to provide the the infrastructure, the tools and the governance services for your single house, way out in the middle of Honduras, for example, potentially, maybe, I don't know. But yeah, generally speaking, you could.
That's interesting. Okay, last question. The legal situation with the government and the ZEDE law was repealed, right? As far as I understand it, that means you can't make a new ZEDE, but all the current ZEDEs, Morazan, Próspera, whatever, are still fine, obviously, under the law. What's the latest in that situation that you know about?
Yeah, so they voted to repeal the constitutional provisions that allow for a ZEDE to exist. They would have had to ratify or reaffirm that appeal within the same, I guess, year, you could call it, within the same, I don't want to use the wrong words, but within the same, legal period, congressional period, maybe is what they call it. And they didn't do that. So 2023, started with the repeal efforts. Obviously, there was a lawsuit launched by Próspera against the government saying, you're infringing in a material way against our ability to operate. And then they didn't ratify the repeal. Why they didn't ratify, I don't know. Maybe it's the lawsuit. Maybe they realized that they shouldn't be repealing this thing that's beneficial to them. I don't really know. So there hasn't been any headline news from the government since that whole saga. They haven't, again, to my knowledge, voted to repeal again this year in this congressional period. But we're still, because there's no headlines, that doesn't mean we're not dealing with the challenges from the initial attacks, right? We're still dealing with the lingering, second and third order effects of them making these claims, having the society rally against us, inhibiting our ability to, for example, import materials without the extra tariff, and then just the general negative buzz around Próspera. It's like, that's when I'm talking to an investor, that's the first thing they ask about. Is like, oh, I just read about Próspera. Like, I thought it got canceled. It's like, then you got to go through this whole thing, and it's just plants this seed of doubt in people when they don't really understand it, and that's the negative effect that we're dealing with, and that's a serious, material, significant negative effect as a result of those early actions that they took. But to my knowledge, there hasn't been any sort of banner headline, government of Honduras is doing X, Y, and Z since that. But
was the law repealed then? I didn't quite understand. It didn't actually. So they started the motion, but then never. So it wasn't. Oh God, there we go. I'm in this world, and I thought it was repealed.
No,
So
yeah, they would have had to ratify it.
So
they didn't.
Officially now, a new ZEDE could form if it wanted to.
I don't know. I don't know if there's still. I believe maybe and again, I don't want to misspeak, but I think potentially maybe technically the law would allow that to happen, but it would need to go through the approval of the government, and I'm sure they wouldn't do that. So I don't know for sure if it could or couldn't happen legally, but I think mechanically I couldn't see that happening.
I need to speak to one of the lawyers about that.
Let's
not speculate.
Yeah, let's not speculate.
But as far as Próspera goes, no, you don't seem to be holding back. I take it people are relatively confident that it's still going in a good direction.
Yeah, we're still building. We're still improving. We're still welcoming people, welcoming businesses. We're going full steam ahead. It's challenging with the friction that the government's put in place. There's more challenges certainly, but we're not sort of backing off right now for sure. That's my perspective at least.
When's the election? Out of interest?
Oh geez, I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know exactly.
I mean, that's obviously could be a turning point as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a function of the political system, what's happening.
Yeah, it's something our lawyers are working closely, with external counsel on, and they're monitoring very, very closely. But something, thankfully, that I don't have to, keep a direct line of sight on. Cool.
Well, anyway, Luke, thanks very much for coming in. That was very informative. And good luck with your family and your community. It sounds like I can tell you're totally into this thing.
I'm glad.
No, but it is true. I mean, I think pioneer places need people like yourself to really just be super positive and point out all the good things and make things happen.
Yeah, man. I mean, for me, there's this clear delta between the world that I'm in and the world that I was in Canada and the world that I want to raise my son in. And I believe that, we have the duty, we have the responsibility as people who see that and understand that the same way we do with Bitcoin, to educate and to make sure that people understand here is the reality. Here is how things are working, and there's an alternative, and there's a system that you can opt out of the old way of doing it. And it's so important for people to take advantage of that and build. And I'd encourage, people to listening to this, check us out, come visit, come build, right? If you're an entrepreneur, do the thing, come build, come visit, come check it out, because it will change the way that you see governance. It will change the way that you function within governance for sure.
Well, you're certainly a great advert for the project, and thanks for coming in, Luke, and hopefully I'll see you over there next time.
Absolutely, looking forward to it.